Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media and running a creative online business without it. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and today I am joined by one of my closest friends, collaborators, inspirations, and all around amazing writer, business owner, hiker, dog parent, etc., the one and only Nic Antoinette. Nic has been on the podcast before talking about the question, how much is enough? We've discussed their decision to leave Instagram, as well as how they have completely rewritten their relationship to money over the past decade of their life and self-employment. And last year, Nic actually took a grown-up gap year, as they called it, and stopped working in their business for a year, which went not quite as they planned. So in this episode, we are welcoming Nic back to work, back to business, with a conversation about how they planned their gap year, what actually happened, and then how we're both thinking about business differently as we look into 2026. And through that conversation, we explore the idea of business degrowth to talk about the intentional and active choice to do less in your business so that you can do more in other areas of your life. I'm so happy to have Nic on the podcast today and so thrilled that you're tuned in for this episode. It is going to be one of our longer ones. It's a little more conversational than usual, but I hope that you'll really enjoy it. So let's dive in, shall we, to my third off-the-grid conversation with Nic Antoinette. Hi, Nic. Welcome back to the podcast.
Oh my gosh, you make me feel so special. Thank you, Amelia. I am so excited to be here. I mean, I'm like your biggest podcast fan. Maybe other people listening feel that they are, but I will fight you for that title. That's fine. And this feels really perfect because I haven't recorded a podcast in such a long time. As you mentioned, I wasn't really working last year, and I had to go into the depths of my office closet today to get my microphone out. And it's quite cold in my house in the winter, especially upstairs. I live in a really old house that's not well insulated, and the closet in my office is like the Arctic, and I have a metal filing cabinet in there with drawers, and that's where I store the microphone. And the mic was so cold when I pulled it out this morning that I'm like, is this gonna work? Did I break the technology? Right? So I'm like frantically plugging the mic in. I was like holding it under my sweatshirt to try to get the mic to warm up because I was afraid that once we started, it wasn't gonna work. So I'm like shivering with like a cold mic against my bare skin, being like, this is dedication to the cause. So I'm very happy to be here. Can confirm the microphone works, and we'll see if I remember how to do a podcast.
Well, thank you for undergoing an Arctic exposition to get here.
It's correct. Thank you. That's the acknowledgement that I needed.
So for folks who are not familiar with you, I guess I'll tell them a tiny bit up front, which is that I met you through the beauty of the internet. And I did your Get Shit Done Club co-working series. I took your How Much Money Is Enough class. You've been writing online and sharing your work and life for well over a decade. And currently you write a newsletter called Now What? So that is a bit of just the landscape as we enter. But I want to really begin by rewinding to your decision to take a grown-up gap year. So could you tell us, what was that original idea? Where did it come from? And then how did you plan to make it happen?
So the first time that I ever heard the term gap year, I was 24 years old. I was working as the director of a children's summer day camp, which feels like 1,000 lifetimes ago at this point. This was my pre-working online era. And that summer, I read a blog post by this 19-year-old Australian guy who was about to embark on what he was calling a gap year. And the way he was using the term was as if this was a thing that everybody knew what it was. Came to find out that this idea of a year of travel and exploration taken between high school and college was a pretty well-known tradition in certain countries, obviously, of course, only within certain social classes, but I had never heard of it. And I remember being like, what the hell? How did I not know? I couldn't have afforded it anyway, right? But I was like, how did I not know about this? And more importantly, how can I make something similar happen as soon as possible? that was the summer of 2009. And I took my grown-up gap year in 2025. So that idea of making it happen as soon as possible sometimes takes 16 years. So I would just like to drop that in there. Sometimes there's a very large gap between the thing that we want and when we can actually make a version of it happen. But the initial dream that I had really tracked with what a gap year traditionally is, which is travel, right? I really wanted to travel anywhere, everywhere. I remember how on my days off from my camp job, I would spend time in the travel section of Barnes & Noble and just pull stacks of Lonely Planet books off the shelf and sit and read them in the middle of the aisle. This was sort of like the beginning of the travel blogging era. This was very much kind of like 4-hour work week, vagabonding, how to travel the world on $50 a day, right? There was like a lot of that going on, the sort of, at least in my consciousness, beginning of the real digital nomad era, right? So there was like something really sexy about that. I actually fully planned a 3-month backpacking trip through South America that was supposed to kick off this gap year I was going to take. Not the kind of backpack people who know me as a long distance hiker now, not that kind of backpacking with like the tent and the hiking and the digging a hole to poop in. This was the kind of backpacking where you stay in a youth hostel, like in a bunk bed and hook up with someone who doesn't speak your language, like the dreams of a 24-year-old, right?
Yeah.
But then I didn't go on this trip because as I started talking about it with people, pretty much everyone from friends to family to people that I worked with kept telling me things like, oh my gosh, it's not safe for you to travel alone. And what about your career? And you're going to be wasting your education. But don't you want to get married and have a family? And you should stay home and get started on your real life, right? Like a lot of that mainstream move only in one direction. This is what's safe narrative. And I'm sure these people had my best interests at heart, right? It didn't feel malicious, but I was young enough, impressionable enough, not set enough in my own desires that I internalized like just enough of everyone else's fears to not go.
Yeah.
So in the almost, 16 years that passed between the summer of 2009, when I initially planned to do some version of this, and the start of my gap year, which was January 2025. So between being 24 and at that point almost 40, I'm 40 now, so much happened, obviously, like in my life, and so much changed for me. I'm like, how do you sum up 16 years of life, right? I quit that camp job and I've been self-employed ever since, right? So you touched on that at the beginning, that I've been self-employed for a really long time. I moved a lot. I lived in San Francisco. I lived in LA. I lived in Central Oregon. I got sober. I became an athlete, first a runner, then a long-distance hiker. I got married. I got divorced. I got married again. I lived in a 20-square-foot van. I moved to Massachusetts. I came out as queer. I became a dog person against all odds, like the most shocking thing for anyone who knew me back in that time. Became a lot stronger in my anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist politics. And yet, through all of that, there was still this quiet desire to take some kind of gap year. I was fascinated with the idea of you're on this trajectory. I think a lot of, I was going to say people like me. I don't know if that's a lot of millennials, a lot of white people who grew up middle class in the US, right? I don't really know what I mean when I say people like me, but we're raised with this get on the escalator and it always goes up, right? You get a certain kind of education, you get a certain kind of job, you get a promotion, you get a certain kind of relationship, you buy a house, whatever was sold as the dreams of success, but the escalator's only ever supposed to go up. And any pause is a mistake. Any step back is a failure. And I didn't really believe that underneath all of the expectations. And something about this idea of a gap year was really the beacon for me of if I can just take a pause, that would feel really good. But as my life changed and as I changed in the years since 2009, what I eventually wanted for the gap year that I wound up taking looked really different, because a lot of it because my relationship to travel has changed. As you know, I'm currently not doing any air travel and really trying to live more of a hyper local life. So once I was in the position financially to be able to take this year, it was really getting clear on what do I want that to look like.
I think that it's so interesting to consider what a gap year meant to you, what it means societally. My familiarity with the phrase was the same as yours, as this sort of gap between high school and college. So this pivotal moment between being a child and being an adult in our society, for those who are able to go to college, for where that's your journey. And I think what's interesting about planning a gap year later in life is exactly what you're describing. It's like, what is your orientation to the linear progress narrative? How are you thinking of the escalator? And I think there is a version of taking a gap year that looks more like a sabbatical, one that's like granted by your employer or a university, where it's like you step off the escalator like to the side for a second, and then you just get right back on and keep going. And yes, it's a pause, but there's no interrogation of the like larger context or larger path that you're on. It's actually meant to like boost your productivity by recognizing maybe you need a break. When you come back, you'll be even better, faster, harder, stronger at this. And so we'll provide you that time to get more of this. Or like in an academic context, I always like to highlight that like academic sabbaticals are not breaks. They're meant to be the time you do your research, you write your book, you like move toward tenure. So they're supposed to actually be periods of like professional acceleration that you can't find through the demands of daily work in a university. So what's intriguing to me then is that like your sabbatical was never about just like getting back on the escalator. It was about using this as a time to, I think, interrogate the escalator and to think about like, what path am I on? What do I want next? So yeah, I'd love to hear more about how you sort of shaped what you thought gap year was going to be. And then like, what did you do on gap year? Because I remember when you told me you were going to take it, I was like, so you're just going to like hang out for 12 months? Which is obviously not what happened. So tell us a little bit about the plan and then what unfolded.
Something that I realized toward the end of gap year is that I think I thought I was taking the year off in which to do what you just said, really reevaluate my relationship to work and my particular kind of work. And what I realized was that that had actually already happened. We've talked, I'm sure probably you'll link to our past conversations here. In the couple of years leading up to taking this break, that's when I quit social media. That's when I went through, what I wound up calling parasocial energetic burnout after having shared so much of myself with so many thousands of people on so many platforms for so many years. That really changed the shape of the work. I no longer post pictures of myself or my life on the internet. And that's been true for a couple of years now, 2.5 years almost. And what I realized was that my relationship to work and having a job or capital C career or all of the things that go into that had actually already changed. And what I needed was a break to be like, so what do I do about the fact that that's true, right? So it's not that I felt changed by the year so much as that I had already changed. And so therefore my situation felt a little bit untenable because I had to figure out what I was going to do going forward. So what my vision was at the beginning, or I guess at the end of 2024, when I was mapping out what I thought this was going to be, I really wanted to deprioritize work and earning and feel what happens in my body and in my mind as a result. The question that I had really was, who am I without work? And I think this is something that a lot of people can relate to. I think it's something that a lot of self-employed people who have made their passions or part of their identity, part of the way that they earn money, especially people like me who came at it from more of a personal branding context, that there is so much of the self involved in the job. And what is it like to stop doing that? I also really wanted to settle more deeply into the town that I've chosen as my hopefully forever home. This isn't where I grew up. This is where my partner's from. And it's been a slow process to make these hyperlocal friendships, to find community in kind of a sleepier suburb where not a ton of stuff's happening. You find my way into place-based activism, that kind of stuff. I wanted to do so many house and garden projects with my partner. Part of our vision is a really prolific garden and being able to do some more self-sufficiency things. And so I wanted to upskill in the realm of food, growing it, preserving it, cooking it, basically doing a lot of hands-on offline things. Because not only was my entire job digital, pretty much, except for some in-person retreats and workshops, but I felt like my entire life was digital, whether that's long-distance friendships or, media or entertainment, or the kind of skills that I have being more communication-based. And I wanted to be in my life, in my body, without a screen for a while. And, there were lots of other little things too, but that was really the vision, to turn away from the digital world and turn toward the this is what this tree looks like at this time of year, right? In the backyard type of situation. So that was the vision. I didn't make any actual plans because a mistake that I often make is to overplan too far in advance. And I think I partially do it out of excitement, and then I partially do it out of fear of, I need to control this experience. So let me plan out every minute of it. So that was a really uncomfortable experiment to not make plans and see what happened. But the plan that I did make obviously was financial. So the main reason that I spent 16 years dreaming about a gap year, but not actually taking a gap year is the reason that anyone would probably guess, and that's money. I just couldn't figure out how it would ever be possible to earn enough money to pay for my current life, keep funding my longer term savings goals, and amass a year's worth of cash to spend on a sabbatical all at the same time. Like the math wouldn't math for that. No matter how I looked at it, it didn't work. And what changed is that in May of 2024, I decided to start divesting from the stock market. I wrote a whole in-depth essay on this decision, basically this like very detailed breakdown with specific numbers of everything that I planned to do with the money and sort of some lifestyle switches. But one of the main things that I was doing with the biggest chunk of that money was to use it to fund the gap year, essentially. And my living expenses aren't that high, and I talk about all of that in there as well. So I essentially put aside a chunk of money from that, the money that was supposed to be for future me, right? Like far in the future me, that I decided to use now instead. So I'd be happy to share that if people are interested. But that's where the money came from. It was future savings that I decided to spend now.
Yeah, I really appreciated at the time and still appreciate now how transparent you were about how you got these funds and made this financial plan for your grown-up gap year. I think that that is a piece of why the gap year happening between high school and college can work, because you've never been an earner, or maybe you had a job in high school, but you're not yet on the escalator. And often, when you graduate high school, maybe people give you gifts, or you find money, or you work a job for a little while to afford your gap year. But there's something about before you take the step on the escalator, you can actually go do this thing you want to do. It's so different when you are later on in life and you have financial needs and plans and goals
and responsibilities, right? Your cost of living is usually pretty low, assuming that, and obviously we're making a lot of generalizations in this, but assuming that someone has moved out of their parent or caregiver's house, right? That they haven't taken on rent or mortgage or utilities, or, there's so many things that you might not have yet speaking for myself at that age, I would have been fine with a very, very, very low cost of travel, right? You're more physically resilient, right? Now I'm 40. I don't want to sleep in the same sleeping situations that I would have been chill with at 24, or maybe in my mind, I think that I could still be that person. And then it's the kind of thing where you sleep slightly wrong and you can't turn your neck for 3 weeks, right? So yes. At 24, that was not an issue.
Yeah, at 24 or 19 or, sometimes even 29, you're much less likely to injure yourself in your sleep.
Extremely relatable. Thank you.
Yes. And of course, all of our chronic illness baddies out there have maybe not ever had that experience. But I think that there is this reality of everything that comes with age and responsibility and the things that we want in our lives.
One of the reasons that I think it can be challenging to talk about something like a gap year is because I'm glad that you just brought that up, right? About chronic pain, chronic illness, any of those things. Every single aspect of taking time out of wage earning, compulsory wage labor in a economy like ours, a world like ours, a country, like ours, you and I are in the US, that I feel like there's 1,000 caveats to give on all of these things, right? And so, yeah, absolutely. The fact that I was ever in a position where it didn't hurt to move my neck weird in the night, yes, amazing, blessing, right? But also I think that's why I was trying to be, especially with the financial side of it, as transparent as possible, because I know from myself, it's really easy for me to look at something that someone else is doing that feels inaccessible to me, and for me to be I'm telling on myself a little bit, but kind of petulant about it, right? Kind of oh, well, it must be nice for you. And when actually the more useful when I can get into this headspace is interesting. What is it about that feels appealing to me? And maybe it is factually accurate that I can't, for any number of reasons, do a copy of the thing that they're doing, but it doesn't mean that I can't do it in some way. I mean, this was on a much smaller scale. I used to feel this kind of jealousy for other self-employed people who would go on these creative retreats or take themselves on big solo retreats. And when I first started working for myself in 2010, I didn't have the resources to do that, but it didn't mean that I couldn't, turn the phone off for one Saturday at home and do like a staycation retreat. And it was like constantly trying to put myself in that place of what of this can I do, as opposed to just writing it off, if that makes sense. So I feel like I've tried to do that even in like how I'm talking about this, because this is a situation that a lot of people couldn't do.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be honest about like what made it possible for me to do it.
I think in my conversation with Ashley Neese in the Clubhouse, I talked about having my own versions of like what I call must be nice-itis, where I'm just like looking at other people's lives and being like, must be nice to have this, must be nice to have that. Too bad I don't. And for me, it's a very like shadowy mindset. It's like when I'm in that place, like it means I'm not in right relationship with myself and my own work and my own life. And I have to like pull back. It's like a different version of compare and despair for me. And I don't have to be on social media to do that. I can just look at other people's websites sometimes and have like all these opinions.
And assumptions. Like my brain is real quick to invite me into assumptions about other people. And then I have to be like, babe, this is none of your business. You have no idea.
Absolutely. Something else I've learned from you, I think through many of your prompts and spaces, is just this question of like, what is one tiny piece of that I can have right now in this moment, in this week, in my current business, in my current life? And that goes back to what you said around maybe I can't have a 10-day creative retreat, but I can have 10 minutes every morning, or I can have one Saturday afternoon with childcare to do this thing, one afternoon with dog care to do this thing. And so I think that is all great context to kind of take us into the next part of this conversation, which is maybe a little more about like what actually happened on gap year, because I'm sure there were plenty of people out there with like must be nice-itis when you started gap year.
Yeah, that was a lot of the question from people would be like, so you're just not going to work? What are you going to do? Right? That kind of thing. And part of my answer was, I don't know. My whole life has been about work for a really long time. That's been my whole identity. Like the point is, like I wanted to be bored. I wanted to be uncomfortable. I wanted to have it be 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and most of the people I knew were working. And I'm like, how does that feel to me? Right? And I was afraid, are people going to judge me because I'm not working? Are they going to make assumptions about me? Are they going to think that I'm not relevant anymore? Are they going to think that I'm like, making very unwise choices it was almost like I was afraid of another set of reactions to do with the escalator, right? It was like different things than it's not safe to travel alone. It's more like
it's not safe to stop contributing to your 401k.
Correct. Right. So to be clear, the plan was never to fully not work at all. It was to shut down everything in my business aside from my paid newsletter, which at that time was hosted on Substack. So part of that choice to keep writing was personal and selfish in that I wanted a space to document what unfolded in real time. And for better and worse, I have learned I started writing publicly on the internet in 2007, so literally almost 2 decades ago. And I will not write if I am not sharing it, other than like a list making in a journal type of situation to process. And that's more like a tool with a purpose. But the kind of long form writing that helps me understand myself and how I think about things and like how I'm processing the world, I do wish that that's something that I could do or access on my own. But for me, it's like there's something about that cycle of you write the thing, you share the thing, you get to talk to readers about their opinions on the thing, and that informs the thing that you write next. It's like this really beautiful web that I really like. And so I knew that I wanted that for the year. And obviously then part of the decision to keep going with the paid newsletter was financial, in that having some income coming in from the newsletter in addition to the savings that I had divested from the stock market, it made things feel emotionally less precarious. I did have enough money in savings to do it, but I couldn't quite unhook fully from having absolutely no money coming in. Like something about that felt like, I couldn't ungrasp that. And also because I didn't know what was going to happen on the other side of the gap year, I was afraid that I was going to basically like torpedo my business and have nothing to come back to, which I think is a lot of people's fear. Even taking breaks in like a particular content stream, right? Oh, if I take a 3-month break from my podcast, am I going to lose all of my listeners, right? And so for me, keeping a newsletter going felt like it was giving me a little bit of a lifeline into having a business to come back to in 2026 if I wanted to. So that was the plan. As for what actually happened, woof. I mean, there was everything that happened nationally and globally, of course, right? Like, let's just sidestep the rise of fascism and everything else. Like, all of that was happening collectively, obviously, to certain people a lot more violently than others. But just to talk about, for me personally, let's see. My partner was hospitalized with meningitis caused by Lyme disease. My mom, who had already been for quite a long time progressively more disabled due to end-stage COPD, fell and broke her hip and kind of lost like all mobility, also had a worsening of her dementia. This was all happening at the same time. And my dad was diagnosed with cancer and he wound up dying, after which I very quickly had to move my mom, who can't live alone because of her various disabilities and care needs. I had to move her from Florida, where she was before, to an assisted living facility near me in Massachusetts. And essentially what that meant was taking over control of her finances and healthcare and basically her entire life. And I haven't had the easiest relationship with my parents. I'll just euphemistically say that. And so all the traveling back and forth down to Florida, I mean, it was a lot, as you know, from being one of my closest friends and someone who was there for me through all of that. But yeah, it wound up being a year of family crisis and a lot of grief, honestly. And I remember sending you many voice notes throughout 2025 where I was basically like, how do I get a refund on my gap year? Right? That was like this thing that I waited for 16 years. Like, and there was, again, like to use the word petulant again, there was part of me that was like, meh, I waited so long for this thing. Why can't I have the things that I want? You know, and I think it's always important to let ourselves feel our own feelings. And that was definitely there for me. But, you know, I also was so acutely grateful to not like have to be working during that time because I don't know how I would have done it. And of course, there are so many people who do have to continue working or have that experience, and you make it work as best as you can. But the fact that I was able to literally drop everything and devote my entire focus and energy to my family. I mean, especially with my dad, because I'm my mom's only kid, but I have 2 half brothers, so same dad, different moms, and they both have pretty demanding jobs and situations where they couldn't go down there to take care of it, right? That it really did wind up being me. Like they helped, of course, but it was mostly me. And while at times I was resentful of that, I was also so grateful that the circumstance, it was almost like, if you want to put this in sort of a like cosmic sense or more of my like spiritual beliefs, like I definitely had the feeling multiple times that God or whatever you want to write, whatever entity you want to put in the place of that word was like, okay, let's line all these things up so that when the time comes, you have what you need in order to show up for the people that you love, you know? And so it felt like a blessing to be able to do that, especially once I eventually paused the paid newsletter, which wasn't necessarily part of the plan, but I wound up taking, I think, 3, maybe 4 months off at the height of my dad's illness and eventual death, because I was just like, there is such a thing as the balm of writing through something in real time. And then there is the like, I literally have nothing to say. You know, what is that? The write from the scar, not the wound. Right? That sort of like adage. So it was, being able to pause that completely, pause all public sharing, pause all work, all earning. That was really necessary for me.
Yeah, I really hate that all of that happened. And also, I'm incredibly glad that you had that space and time and that you didn't have to work during that time. And I say that as someone who my spouse's dad died last year and their job offered no actual bereavement leave. There was supposed to be leave, but it was not taken. And instead, they were literally zooming into things from hospice because of demands at work. And witnessing that happening provided so much clarity about how fucked up the modern workspace, contemporary nonprofit also workspace is. And made me really glad that that was on a position you were in when you were trying to handle all this.
I will say that kind of thing is something that it's not like 2025 was the first year that I thought about, capitalist inequality. I mean, obviously not. Anyone who's been in my corner of the internet for years and years and years knows that, I've been thinking about these things. But I thought a lot about Sarah Jaffe's book, Work Won't Love You Back. even if people know nothing else about the book, just the title, right? Like work well, this idea of what we are told we are supposed to be able to get from work, so that if we buy into that belief, then it can subsume and cannibalize the rest of our entire life, right? And I think going through this process of disease, disability, death, right, with family members caretaking, and really just highlighted for me how fucked up the systems are. And I knew that, but there's always a deeper level of understanding that comes when you're learning something in a really intimate way. And that helped me to ask myself questions of, what is the role of work in terms of, wage earning work? What do I want that to look like in my life going forward? And then also really helped me, I think one of the biggest personal sort of reckonings for me around all of this was how much I had taken on, a lot of times subliminally, the conditioning of which kinds of labor are valid and worthy and worth praising and which aren't. And so much of what had been demeaned or demonized, whether that was because of sexism or classism or any of the isms, is sort of like caretaking, a lot of the things that we do in the home, all of the things that used to go into the actual root of the word economy, right? Like household management, how we keep ourselves and each other fed, sheltered, clothed, healthy, caring for people when they're not healthy, any of those things. So much of how that is talked about, even in the kind of online business entrepreneurial space that I came up in, was like, as much as possible, you outsource that to other people. The only thing that you should be doing, smart entrepreneur person, right, with head pat, I'm so great, is using your creative brain to make more money, right? And whatever the Steve Jobs dent the universe quote, right? That it's like, you have to make the biggest impact on the biggest scale, right? And along the way, what gets looked down on? Doing the laundry, walking the dog, making dinner, being part of your community, right? Like all of these things. And so for me, there was a fundamental, at an embodied level, shift into, I want all of that to take up so much more of my time and space and creative energy than it ever has before. And that's informing a lot of kind of what I'm thinking about now and like how my relationship to work and business have shifted.
Yeah. And I will say, like, as your friend moving alongside that year with you, it was quite noticeable, like what became most important, how you wanted to spend your time, how you were willing to spend time, like the things you were no longer willing to spend time on, whether that be, I think, just like a lot of email, various being on screens. And, that was part of your initial desire, right? Was to perhaps like have a more analog lifestyle or something like that. But I think that what shifted really was this like deeper sense of like, oh no, this is not just about getting off my screen, but about like a deeper reorientation around like what is the value of labor and whose labor is valuable and how do I think about that in my own life? Like what labor am I doing? How do I value it differently? What is the labor of like people around me? Because we are all laboring like together and for each other, but it's not all wage labor. And it's not all quote unquote highly skilled labor, which in our economy means like working on a computer, even though there are so many other more like literally skills where life is at stake than your computer skills. So I've really appreciated watching you dissect and divest from that. And it's helping me reflect on what's changing for me as well.
The other aspect of this that I want to talk about a little bit that was really impactful for me, and perhaps one of the most nuanced parts of it internally, was how freeing, almost like unexpectedly freeing, it felt to decouple my identity from my job. Amongst its many wonderful aspects, the business of self-employment, I have found, can be a real mindfuck, especially my kind of self-employment where so much of the business is me. I never went the influencer route, but it was always me in terms of I write personal essays. Like I hosted interview-based storytelling podcasts. I'm leading the retreats. I'm teaching the workshops, right? And when you spend so many hours each week for many, many, many years, essentially selling yourself and the offerings that you've created, for me, it's with my brain. For someone who's doing more of a product-based business, maybe it's more tangibly with their body. It's easy for the line between being a person and being a sort of product to blur, or at least, obviously, I'm just talking from my own experience, but I've talked to plenty of other self-employed people that have felt similarly. And like it's honestly not an exaggeration to say that the past year of no business or very little business, along with the past, whatever, 2.5 years it's been since leaving social media and deciding, like I said, to no longer post photos of myself or my life on the internet, it's really fundamentally changed my understanding of myself and my identity and personhood and worth. I think that's a big one. Feel fully decoupled from my job in a way that I genuinely, Amelia, never thought would have been possible. I don't even know that it's a thing that I even thought to want, because it was something that I just took so for granted. There's a reason that the first question, at least in, my experience in the US, that most people ask upon meeting someone new is, so what do you do? And they don't mean, what do you do for fun? What do you do in the evenings to relax? They mean, what do you do for money, right? And the experience of not being able to answer that question, or almost feeling kind of rebellious for an entire year of, I meet someone in the sauna at the gym or whatever, and they're, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm not working right now. And obviously it's up to me if I choose to give any more information, and it's up to that person if they ask any questions, but almost nobody does. It like completely ends the conversation, which I think is so interesting, because why is it that this is the only aspect of somebody's life or identity that we're interested in? And like, I think for me, the other aspect on a more kind of ego plane is I just no longer care about looking cool on the internet, about needing people to think that I'm aspirational or attractive or interesting or smart or any of that, which doesn't mean that I don't want to do the best writing that I can do. That's a craft and that's really important to me. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't feel meaningful and connective when people when the writing means something to them, like, of course, right? But it almost feels like the phantom limb of, I used to care so much about what people on the internet thought about me. And it's like the part of me that was constantly seeking the kind of validation from the online world, and therefore through my job, the part of me that wanted to be seen as special in this very public way, it's just gone. And it feels so wild. It feels like I'm living in like a whole new world. And there is a sort of reckoning of like, okay, if a lot of the reasons that you were doing a thing, or a lot of what you were getting from the thing, and all of this isn't to paint my almost 20 years of various self-employment with, like, I love it. I've met almost all of my best friends through that. Like so much good can be found there, as I think most long-term self-employed people will tell you. I'm more just talking about the sort of challenging aspects and the things that have shifted. But it's like, if so much of what you got from something is no longer there for you, then what do you do? And I feel like that's sort of the question I'm at now at the start of 2026.
Hey there, lovely Off the Grid listener. We're taking a quick break from this episode because I want to make sure that you know that you can become an Off the Grid sponsor and share your work here on the podcast during a mid-roll ad like this, or in a pre-roll ad that airs before every single episode on our feed. In past seasons of the show, I have shared some of my favorite affiliate partners. If you've heard the Flowdesk ad, you know what that's all about. But since season 3, I've also been partnering with listeners like you to showcase your work and the amazing, inspiring things that you're creating and sharing with the world. I know I don't have to tell you this, but Off the Grid listeners are smart, fun, values-centered business owners who create and share impactful things on and offline. We are writers, artists, designers, wellness practitioners, service providers, shop owners, and product makers who know a lot about our craft, but need more support making the business side of things thrive. If that sounds like the kind of crew that you want to get your work, your products, your services, your books, your free lead magnets in front of, I hope that you will head to the show notes and learn more about placing an ad on the podcast today. One of our very happy sponsors from last year wrote to me and said this: "Placing an ad on Off the Grid was hands down the best investment I made last year. My cost per lead ended up being around $6, which is 70% less than Meta's average, and nearly all of those leads are still highly engaged a year later. On top of that, many have become customers, bringing in over 13 times the return on my investment." If you would like to hear your work shared by me and featured in a spot like this, you can head to the show notes to learn more about our ad opportunities. And whether or not you decide to sponsor an episode, I am so grateful that you listen to the show, and I hope that you will check out some of our partners this season. They have amazing free and paid offerings for you, so please make sure you click through when you hear them. Okay, enough about our sponsorship opportunities. Let's go ahead and dive back in to this episode.
So I think to sort of bring listeners a bit into like your business and present time with us, right? Like throughout your gap year, you wrote your newsletter, with the exception of the months when you paused it while you were grieving and doing also all of the logistics that come up with the death of a loved one, which is so much.
So much death logistics.
Phone calls and phone calls and phone calls. So aside from the months you were handling all of those logistics, you were writing your newsletter throughout 2025. You made the switch from Substack to Button Down. So you left Substack during that period, which we'll talk about in some future conversations. And now we're in early 2026 and you are writing your newsletter mostly behind a paywall, but with some pieces that are public and free to all subscribers. And you have decided not to immediately bring back any of your offerings. So I mentioned at the very beginning, like, part of the way that we met and became friends was like, I joined your co-working club, I took some of your classes, I downloaded your free workbooks, but all of that is still on pause. So really coming back to work has just meant coming back to the newsletter in a more like consistent and intentional and active way. I'm curious if you could share more about like how you made that decision. Why aren't you like all the way back? Do you ever want to be all the way back? What does that even mean? I'm really curious.
All right, so what you're saying is that you would like me to put together a more articulate version of all of the voice notes that I have sent you that basically are just me screaming, "What is a business?"
Well, yes. In fact, I would love that.
Okay. All right. Let me see what I can do for you. So I still need a job of some kind because I still need to earn money, right? So there's that. But again, this spending all of last year decoupling my job from my identity, I feel like I'm now able to ask perhaps a more generative question about the shape of the job. And the question that I've been sitting with is, given that I do need to earn, what is the most pleasurable, creatively fulfilling, and relationally connective and values-aligned way to do that? You mentioned leaving Substack. I have a lot I could say about that. And currently, the answer to that for me is writing. So the reason that I decided not to bring back other offerings right away or go more full speed into business is honestly because of how tough 2025 wound up being. And, even having my mom up here now, it's not like, and now everything's magic. There's just a lot that's happening. And I didn't feel ready to do that. And I wanted a little bit more time. So I guess backing up a little bit. So I write a weekly personal essay style newsletter, like you said, hosted on Button Down, called Now What? That's really geared toward big-hearted, liberation-oriented people like me who are grappling with the question of who and how we want to be in a collapsing world. I promise it's more uplifting than it sounds.
It's beautiful.
Throughout 15 plus years of self-employment, I've worn so many different hats and created so many other things, and there's no shortage of things that I could do, but I feel very clear that all I want to do right now is write. I want to write my newsletter each week, perhaps write another book, stay offline otherwise, keep things digitally quiet, and really just keep my hosting and teaching and facilitation hat on the shelf a little bit longer. So at the beginning of December, I decided that I was going to do a 6-month experiment. So basically, I looked at my savings, right? Ran the numbers, looked at the savings, and then looked at the income for the newsletter because there were definitely ramifications of, leaving Substack. And I decided that for 6 months, so through the beginning of December of last year, through what is at the end of May, that I was going to devote myself to the newsletter without doing any other paid work. The friction there is that, at the time that I made that decision, I didn't and still don't earn enough money for my newsletter to cover all of what were at that time my regular bills, expenses, spending patterns. But so it is a bit of a risky choice in that regard, but I can feel how much I want it. And as a result, I have noticed that I've been willing to cut expenses and personal spending in ways that I wasn't willing to do before, which I'm also chronicling through the newsletter, right? I recently wrote about the guidelines. I'm doing a 90-day low spend experiment, but basically I'm also willing to spend down my savings a little bit more too, to supplement the newsletter income if necessary. But my actual goal or my dream or desire is to reduce my spending to the point where my bare minimum / thriving, but with nothing really extravagant, can be covered by the newsletter. And that would be my ideal scenario. And if that can happen, then I will offer other things either as I am creatively inspired to do so, or if there's something that comes up and I need more money, right? One of the things that I think works really well about self-employment once you get to a certain number of years or a certain earning level is that it can work a little bit like a dial in a way that a salaried job can't, where if you need more money, you work more, you do more offerings, you put more things out there. And if you don't need as much money, then you work less. And that's very appealing to me. So that's where I'm at right now. It might not work, we'll see. One of the downsides of having a newsletter type like I do, where I do one post a month that's public for everyone. It's more of a link roundup, but all of the essays are behind a paywall with a free preview getting sent out to all subscribers every week. So people can decide if they want to upgrade and pay for it. And I have it's a pay what you can model. So people can choose their price point, but I no longer have a public-facing marketing channel. There's no top of funnel. There's no way for new people to find me. So the normal churn of a newsletter, any sort of subscription product, people leave. That's just a normal part of it. And so I have to figure out, what do I want to do to replace what am I going to add to the business ecosystem that can bring new people in? I don't know. There's various ways to do that. But, I just keep reminding myself that if I change my mind and want to do something different, I can, and no one's going to stop me from bringing other things into my business. If I need more money, very few decisions, especially in the realm of business, are unchangeable. So it's only ever the next right step. And for me, this feels like the next right step. And if I have to do something different, then I'll do something different.
I really feel like what you just laid out is essentially business degrowth in practice. You are intentionally just doing enough. And you are then sort of adjusting the spending in the rest of your life where you don't have so many fixed expenses. There are the certain things you have to have, but everything that is quote unquote optional, you're really putting into question. And it seems like asking yourself, do I want this enough that I want to literally work more for it? And if the answer is no, then you're letting it go. It can go such that you can keep your work small and your life happy, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the goal?
Yeah, we've talked about this in my past episodes, on Off the Grid, so folks might have already heard this, but truly one of the foundational questions of my life and work is the question of how much money is enough. I'm fascinated with this question, both, from an anti-capitalist lens, from so many different lenses, and getting clear and specific on my answer to that question of how much money is enough for me right now, and then staying in honest relationship with the question as my circumstances and desires shift and change. That's what guides so much of my decision-making in my business. And that's been true for years, right? I used to write a series called Tiny Biz Letters, which was basically a transparent behind-the-scenes look at how I run my business and money and all of that kind of stuff. And that question was always really part of it, because as much as everything I said about how wrapped up my identity and worth felt in my job, I also the both and of I've never been someone who wants a capital C big career. And so part of the reason I've been self-employed for such a long time and never had an office job, a corporate job, a work for somebody else 9 to 5 salaried position. I've never done that because the things that are most important to me are creative autonomy and time wealth. Obviously, we need a certain amount of money, and that's going to be different for different people depending upon their circumstances. But I've pretty much always been uninterested in earning that much more than whatever my defined enough number is. And sometimes, when I was still doing stuff like investing in a retirement account, things that I've chosen not to do anymore, which that lesson, if you're not trying to save money for the future, that also lessens your, monthly need. But my enough number was just higher, right? So I worked more. But this question has really always been pivotal for me in terms of making decisions. And really, it's just now that I am doing almost whatever I can to make that number smaller, because while I am interested in doing the best work that I can for my newsletter, when I show up to writing, I want to be all there. There is no part of me that's phoning it in. There's no part of me that doesn't care. My tolerance for doing things that I don't want to do in that regard is really low, to the point, I think people can feel it when you resent your job in a creative context, right? That that's something the listeners and the readers can feel. And I never want to do that to them or for me. So the one thing that I'm doing is something I really want to be doing. I'm just aware of, okay, when it gets to the point where this earns enough money, then I'm not seeking additional growth on top of that.
Yeah. So the working definition of business degrowth that you and I have kind of been passing back and forth, I feel like over the past few months, is something like intentionally and actively spending less time on and making less money in your business. And I feel like part of what has made that possible is that you've been asking this question, how much money is enough, for a very long time. And also that over the past few years, you have effectively decentered work from your life and your identity. And so business degrowth, in that way, I think of it as you not only stepped off the escalator, you climbed back down it. You're I'm actually just not doing this at all. Climbing down the escalator, and then I'm exiting the mall or the airport or wherever the escalators are. You're I'm not even in that building anymore. And through that process, you didn't totally lose your love of writing. You didn't abandon, the things that actually matter to you are still present. Your creative energy is still there for certain things in certain ways, but you relocated where the value in that is.
Mm-hmm. And I'm aware that none of this is a static, fixed thing, that I might have different desires to work more in this specific context at a different time. And if so, then I will make different choices, or I might need more money. And if so, then I will do that, right? It's I think this idea of degrowth, I feel like we can't talk about it without talking about the growth imperative of capitalism, just fundamentally, which obviously is the core principle, right? The core principle of number always go up. That is what our current global economy is built on. There's a couple of really excellent episodes of the Upstream podcast that delve into this, interviews with folks that are much more research and expert level about degrowth at a more macro systemic level when it comes to government and big business. That was my introduction to this idea of degrowth, came from a much bigger picture lens. And so when you and I are talking about it, I think of it as sort of just this very tiny scale, almost microcosm version of that, where we're taking action at the level of our own lives and businesses. And I feel like the thing for me when I think about embracing a framework or a mindset of degrowth is what it means to me is that I'm constantly pushing back against the idea that no matter what, more is better, always. More followers, more likes, more engagement, more fancy bylines, more status, more readers, more virality, more retweets, whatever, that more listeners, more clients, more sales, more money. This is how mainstream, not just online business, but business operates, how all business really under capitalism operates, is that more is better and you should always be wanting to grow. And anything else is, quote unquote, playing small. Those were definitely messages that I got that were very much aimed at sort of self-employed women, right? Let's just say that it's you need to not play small. You need to want more. And sure, maybe for some folks that messaging is helpful, but what if you actually just don't want it, right? And I think under capitalism, we have this often unspoken belief that there's no such thing as enough. And I'm saying this outside of the reality that scarcity is baked into the model of capitalism. It is, as they say, a feature, not a bug, and that there are on purpose, many, many, many people who, no matter how hard they run on the hamster wheel, factually don't have enough, right? But if that is not true, like that is not true for me right now, okay, then what? If I don't want to contribute to this perpetuation of the belief that you should always be working more, working harder, creating more, getting more, none of this is me saying no one should care about their job or no one should want career success or no one should try to earn more money. First of all, because what other people do is none of my business, right? What they want for themselves, that's out of my lane. But also because all of us have different set points of enoughness based on our particular circumstances and personalities and desires. And so I feel like through all of this, what I have been inviting myself and anyone who is interested to do is to consider what enoughness would look like in any of these different areas, right? How much money is enough for you? How many readers of a newsletter are enough? Because the alternative is what? Just trying to grow and grow in every single way, in every aspect of your life. What I think often about like what has to be sacrificed for an ascension culture to always be the thing, right? Like you're never allowed to be satisfied. You're never allowed contentment. You're never allowed to be like, wow, I have 100 readers on my newsletter. Like imagine being in a room with 100 people. That would probably feel like enough, right? It's like, but it sets us up for just perpetual dissatisfaction all of the time. And I really kind of want to push against that.
Yeah, I think that this is so important. And as I think about degrowth, I mean, I, like you, learned about it sort of from the context of like political economy and explicitly related to climate change. Like, how do we actively like degrow our economies, degrow our societies to try to live in a way that will not completely decimate our planet? And, degrowth is not a brand new concept. People were having this conversation before, we have now surpassed many of the limits that people set on unreversible climate change. But I learned degrowth in that context. And I really have been inspired by how you're applying it in this instance, like to your business, to your tiny business. And what that looks like is a complete reorientation around enoughness and satisfiability in our work and in our lives. And this is a question that has come up for me so many times in business, but I didn't have any of this language to talk about it. Like, there were many periods when I was growing Softer Sounds, and I talked about this a bit in my episode last week where I talked through the first 5 years. It's like the first year of business was like, will it work? Can I even make enough money can I make enough money full stop? Like, is that even possible to hit enough? And then the next 2 years were like, okay, well, how does this work? How do I sustain this? How do I like keep making enough? But then after that, I started making more money. I started taking on more clients. I started working more. And I had this experience of like, to what end? Like, what am I making all this money for? What do I want? And for me, that sort of shifted into this like desire to like, I want to buy this home that I live in, and that feels important and will set me up for a type of housing stability that I want for my future. And then I hit that goal and I was like, okay, what now? And that is where I find myself this year in like pulling back from the very successful business I created because I don't want to work that hard anymore. And it feels like everything in my like Midwestern working class background is like, how fucking dare you just say you don't want to work hard anymore? Like, it is so hard for me to acknowledge that in myself, to allow myself that space. I have such strong narratives around both like how lazy of you and how unsafe that is. But to me, like, I think there was something around like when I had a job, I would work hard and I would tell myself that I hated it because my like employer was making me. Like, I have no other choice. But when I found myself working that hard and hating it in my own business, it became this like kind of painful to look into mirror of like, who is making you do this, Amelia? And the answer wasn't the bank account. And it wasn't my spouse who was like, please get off your computer. And it wasn't even my clients who were most of the time not paying attention to me. Like, it was me. And I had to really face these questions of what is enough and can I be satisfied? And how do I stop making more the goal?
I think that is why this is worth looking at in such specificity, because I would argue that, who was making you, yes, maybe in the moment it was you, but had you not absorbed the messages that you have absorbed from so many different aspects of culture and puritanical work ethic, all of these things are layered in hundreds of years deep, right? That came from somewhere. And so this is why the sort of overly simplistic, just rest more, just take more time off, like that didn't work for me, because I had to actually be able to. This is why I'm such, like, my personal journaling style is really list making, right? For me to be able to make the list of, why do I need to have a job? What is the purpose of a job for a Nic Antoinette in 2026, right? And really, the purpose of a job for me is to have enough money to live. Because everything else that I also get from, let's say, my job as personal essay writer on a newsletter right now, that relational connectivity, the creative fulfillment, all of that, I could be doing that for free. It's not like getting paid is the entrance. If I decided to, there's plenty of people who write beautiful newsletters or books or whatever, books not so much because you're paying for a book, but you know what I mean, right? You could create that for free. And so what I actually need is enough money to live. Let me just allow that to be true, that if I were to win the gratuitous lottery tomorrow, I actually wouldn't need to earn money from a job. I don't believe I would stop writing. I think I would probably stop writing at this frequency, right? I wouldn't necessarily be doing a weekly newsletter, but I don't see any version of myself that isn't interested in being a writer. Like, that has just been fundamentally true for as long as I have a conscious memory, right? Like, I think about the little stories I used to write when I was a kid, right? And I draw the characters and do, like, some things are just like intrinsically a part of who you are. The format might change, right? And so I think it's like the value of really looking at all of the different aspects of the thing. What am I getting from this? And something my partner and I say to each other a lot, I don't know where this initially came from, but this idea of don't go to the hardware store for milk, right? That it's like, don't go to your job for your personal validation of worth and worthiness. And I will tell you, I did that for a very long time. And so really just like looking at all of this has been an exercise in honesty and clarity for me, and I think so much of it, growth, degrowth, all of that, the thing that's actually the most appealing to me is this idea of right sizing or right fit, right? Building a right fit life, having a right size fill in the blank, right? A right size business that like, for example, right now I have about 750 paid readers. And like I said, it's a pay what you can model. So people are paying kind of all different amounts. My ideal numbers wise, in terms of money, depending upon how much people bought in at, would be closer to 1,000 people. So it's not like I don't want or need to grow in any area of my job, right? Or any area of my life. I think that's one of the myths of this idea of right sizing or enoughness, this idea that everything must stay at its current level, right? Because we can make anything our religion. You can make growth your religion, but then you can swing the pendulum to the other side and be like, wanting to grow at all is morally wrong, right? Where none of that is what I'm saying. Like that's like, actually, I think enoughness is a living thing. It's always shifting. And in order for something to be right size, for anything to be right size, there's always some dials that are getting turned down, some that are getting turned up, and some that are being left alone in maintenance mode. So it's like degrowth in the way we're defining it, to me, is really about taking this more detailed, thoughtful, and nuanced approach where you are intentionally shrinking certain aspects of your life or business with the understanding that energy, time, creativity, capacity for work, those are not infinite. Those are limited things. And so you're shrinking them in some areas instead of just operating under the mainstream assumption that, like I said, more is always better. But also, sometimes you are trying to grow in certain areas as well, right? That I would love to have more paid subscribers to my newsletter. But there will be a point at which if I were to get close to 1,000, I don't then want 2,000. And I'm not going to turn it away. I don't know where they'd come from, right? There's no social media. There's no public platform. So, I mean, I guess if you're a reader and you like my newsletter, tell all your friends, I guess. But like, I won't be doing anything. I also think there's a difference between some of the narrative is like, of that, you're playing small, that it's you're blocking expansion, right? There can be some sort of like, I don't know, manifesting language in that, but
It's like limiting beliefs.
Correct. That's what I meant. Yeah. That I'm not opposed to having more paid readers. That, although I will tell you from having experienced parasocial energetic burnout, one, there's a reason that all of my personal writing is behind a paywall. That is what feels more energetically correct to me. And two, there is such a thing as too many readers for me. That with the type of writing that I do, there are plenty of writers who want as many readers as possible, and that is not me. There would come a time where it would become too big and something would have to change. I don't think, given the nature of all the other decisions that I've made, there's no possibility for virality because everything's behind a paywall at this point. But I am not, more is not only not always better, it's think about, there's a right size number of people on a live Zoom workshop. It is fundamentally not the same experience on Zoom if there's 20 people as there are with 40 people as there are with 1,000 people. And each of those can be right for, if it's a watch only, no chat is open webinar, great, 1,000 people. If you're trying to have people unmute and share, 20 people, right? So it's like thinking about this idea of right sizing based on the context of what you want each thing to be.
Yeah, I really appreciate this emphasis on right sizing. And I think that for me, business degrowth is just this sort of encapsulation of something I've seen happen for many people over the past few years where we hit a point where our business is working and we just don't want the more-ness that we're supposed to want from that. We don't want to scale, even though everyone looking at our business says, time to scale, you're ready to scale, it can get bigger, you can make more, you can do more. I feel like when you hit that point, business degrowth is a very just helpful phrase and concept to be actually, what about less? Actually, I'm not on that path. I'm on a different path. I'm going a different direction. But I would agree with you that with what we are actually seeking there is right-sizedness and enoughness through degrowth, because this is not about, the punk Olympics of who can have less than somebody else or who can be more off-grid than somebody else or who can be more radical than somebody else. That's not what I'm interested in within degrowth. And then I also am not interested in, however, a sort of just succumbing to underearning in our businesses. And that's something that's been a part of my personal journey of, I worked, especially through grad school and even a little bit in the beginning of my business, or when I was an audio editing freelancer, I just truly didn't believe I could ever make a sustainable amount of money to live off of, right? It took me a very long time in my working life to ever make more than $40,000 a year, writ large. And that especially when I was living in Chicago through all of that, that was not enough money. It was not enough money for rent and healthcare and transportation and food, let alone, birth control or fun stuff. I needed more money than that. And I don't want business degrowth to be this flag we wave. There's some type of virtue signaling around how nobody should make more money. Because I think that with the artists and creative business owners I work with, very often we need to be making more money than we are. And I love what you said about how degrowth isn't about less growth or turning the knob down in every area. It's about finding these different ways to work with growth. It's about orienting around right-sizedness and enoughness. And some of that happens in our business and some of that happens in our life, right? That's the other piece of this is if you change nothing about your life and you have a very expensive lifestyle and you keep having that creep of you make more and you spend more and you spend more and you spend more, you're not going to be able to degrow your business because you haven't looked to your life and to the financial realities there. But we have to be working in both of these spaces. And it may be the case that you need more money in your life. And so you need to make more money in your business. That's a very nuanced personal thing that each of us has to decide. But I just wanted to say that the sort of succumbing to underearning is not, to me, the degrowth path. That's something that we actually can work through in our businesses and try to grapple with, or at least I had to. I had to figure out how to make money and believe that I could make money. And I had to hit the point where I didn't need more and asked myself why I was still pushing that direction. That's where I could move into business degrowth. I could not have worked with business degrowth when I was still making, less than $40,000 a year and living in Chicago. That wasn't the time for that.
Yeah. I mean, I agree 1,000% with all of that. I think potentially there's a little bit of an issue of language in this for me, meaning if we're going to use the word degrowth specifically, yes, because something is getting smaller. So you have to have reached a certain point, right? if we want to put it in another way, like closet degrowth, right? Like if you only own one outfit, there really isn't a lot of room to degrow and not be naked, right? But I do think that understanding how much money is enough, what kinds of success, visibility, and public acclaim in the realm of job, right, like we're talking about, feel like enough, is a useful thing for every person at every stage of their working life or their business. Because the truth, like you said, for many people is that when it comes to money, they are not yet at their enoughness level of earning. But without an actual interrogation into how much would be enough and why, and is that how much would be enough for me, or is that how much I've been told to be, right? There's like a lot of, and this is why I don't think, obviously, I've taught workshops on this idea of how much money is enough. It's not like, and this is your enoughness number, and now you just ride off into the sunset with that number forever. Like this is an ongoing conversation that's like always sort of happening in the back of my mind, because there's like shifts and changes, and we unlearn some stuff, and, or then you have a baby, or then this happened, right? Your life changes, things change. But for me, because I also spent plenty of time under earning, either from a place of not feeling like I deserved more or whatever, any of the things that you just said. But I sort of just remember at that time feeling like amorphous bad. And it wasn't until I started getting clear on, okay, what actually is that number? If right now my felt experience, for example, is that I do not have enough money, is that true, first of all? Because I have many, many personal experiences and have had this conversation with many, many people through my work over the years, that there can be a real gap between the tangible reality of our situation and the felt experience of it. I know people who have many, many 3x, 4x, 5x the amount of money that I have, and 100% feel like they don't have enough. Again, because capitalism, we are programmed to feel that way. So, and then the opposite is true, where I know people who are quite low earners, who are just more frugal people, who feel like they have enough and they have less, right? So it's like, all of this to say that if we know what that enough number is for us right now, it can help guide our decision making in everything from what kind of business model to build, to which marketing strategies to focus on, how much we're going to charge for our products. Are we going to do more of a one-to-many thing, or are we going to go kind of the one-on-one, more higher, right? And this is all the stuff that you talk about so beautifully through literally your entire body of work with this podcast and business, that like all of this stuff put together, I think that's the picture. It's not just a question of degrow the business or grow the business. It's taking a moment to interrogate why we want the things that we want. Who benefits if I'm constantly trying to grow my business and my own personal individual success way beyond the point that I need in order to be well? And the sacrifices in order to do that are that I have to give up my volunteering at the food pantry, that I can't go to any protests, that I can't be making meals for a friend who's having surgery, right? Like all these other things that have always been nominally important to me and are now actually lived parts of my life that I'm not willing to give up. So what am I willing to give up in my spending in order to work, right? So that's sort of the question, is this more holistic piece.
What this is taking me back to is just that in the realm of self-employment and online business, there is an escalator like there is in every other part of life. And I think actually maybe I will reshare my episode on getting off of the online business growth escalator after this, because that is very much what I was interrogating. Like that episode was me first meeting this edge of I don't want to scale. I'm done with this idea that growth is always the goal for my business. I got to where I want to be, and now I want to move maybe laterally or quote unquote backwards or something else. I don't want to keep going up. And with all that in mind, I think that if you start a business, if you become self-employed and you don't do any of the interrogation you just talked about, I think you will end up on one of those escalators, because businesses are happening within capitalism, and capitalism becomes the growth imperative inside your business that just pushes for this more. We have to actively interrogate and deconstruct that. We have to do the work of shifting our needs and desires in our lives, especially for those of us who generally have enough day to day. You have housing, you have food, you have relationships, you have internet access and other needs that you're generally able to take care of and care for. I think we're the people who I really want interrogating enoughness. Because if even we can't stop that imperative to grow, if even we're never stepping back, who's going to be able to, right? And so I think for me, some of this goes back to the like political economy of degrowth in the sense of like, where do I think my place is in that? And obviously I'm not in the 1%, but I am really willing to like think about enoughness on every level of my life and to reshape my business and perhaps do less in it to be more connected to that for the reasons you mentioned. Like that takes me into the sort of like civic responsibility that a lot of people are feeling right now, or this tension between like the desire to like be in the streets and the reality of like being at your desk. To me, the deeper reality is like if you build a business that requires 60 hours of you a week, you will never not be able to be at your desk. And what does that choice mean? And how do we make different choices if we want to? Or like, what are we delaying that change for, right? Like, if you're realizing now, or you realized in 2020, or you realized in 2016 that like you want to be a part of change in the world, how do you want to spend your time? Where are you like working outside of your business for those things? These are questions I'm asking myself right now too. So like as you spend less time in your business, you're doing these other things. And I'd maybe love to end on this note of like, how do you schedule your days now? There's still a part of my brain that's like, what do you do if you're not working 6 or 8 hours a day? Like how is your time actually spent?
It's a great question. Well, right now I'm still getting over the flu, right? So the last which has honestly lingered for like 3 weeks. So, I say that sort of jokingly, sort of not, because that's part of what I always thought too. But the thing is, when you have to or choose to give so much of yourself to your employment, so many of these other things are forced to not take up the space that they actually need to take up, right? Like, for example, one of my dogs had surgery almost 10 days ago. And to actually be able to, as she's clearly feeling poorly and wanting comfort, to sit on the couch with her and pet her and let her sleep with her head on my lap, as opposed to being like, yeah, you're fine. I'm going to go back to my desk, right? So I like say that jokingly, but also it's what I have noticed is it's sort of like a lovely version of a thing that's usually said pejoratively of, tasks fill the time you allow them, right? If you have this thing on your to-do list and you don't schedule more things, then it will just take longer. But I think there's also another side of that too. When I'm not trying to rush through my life to get back to work, I am able to just be more present with that. So that's, one aspect, but something that feels perhaps specific to me, but anything we think we're the only one, we're not the only one. Because of the type of self-employment that I chose, that I have talked about, right? This really personal story sharing thing that was really focused on me. And because I was the one facilitating the Zoom things, doing the thing, right? Almost all of my relational energy went into work. So it wasn't just work, I'm making these planners to sell, or I'm doing, I think there's a lot of kinds of work that don't involve as much relationality and I say that that's not good or bad, that's just there's different kinds of work, right? But my work was so much about facilitating the space, hosting the people, having the conversations, running the mastermind, that I was holding space for so many people. And a lot of poor boundaries on my part with this and not knowing how much was enough led me to that really kind of intense experience of parasocial energetic burnout in 2023. So it's a lot of what has happened between summer of 2023 and now is for me to try to figure out how can I do the work that I want to do without giving all of my relational energy, because what then wound up happening was I was doing no volunteer work. I was not really showing up in the community. I had a very small number of friends because my interpersonal gas tank was completely empty at the end of every single workday. And it was sometimes a Herculean effort to be present with my partner. And some of that was by choice because I have the best readers in the world. That is another hill I will die on. You frequently say to me how wholesome and lovely the comment section of my newsletter is. And they're just wonderful people. Same thing with Get You Done. And so much of that was really fulfilling for me. And there is a part of me, I will tell you, in this business degrowth that is sad and misses that. I have often thought about bringing Get You Done Club back for alumni only just for a month, literally because I miss people, individual people that I'm well, what are they up to? I want to see their face on Zoom, right? So that, it's nice to miss stuff. That feels lovely. And having scaled back my work in these relationally energetic intensive ways is what has then allowed me to do some of this other stuff in my life. And I think people have different capacities, introversion, extroversion, whatever you want to call it. I had almost 2 decades of proof that I couldn't do both at the same time, or at least not in a level. And as some of this stuff has become more important to me for any number of reasons, and I want to put my body in the space in my community, Nic Antoinette, I can't do that and be hosting a 4-hour Zoom at the same time. I just can't. And I salute anybody who can. That's incredible for you. I can't do it, or I'm not showing up as my best self to either thing, I will say, if that's the case. And so it's some of what I'm doing with my time now is it's more what am I doing with my energy, right? And so much of it is because, like I said, we've had a garden for a couple years. I really want to expand our veggie growing capacity, and we planted the beginnings of an orchard. And this is a world about which I know nothing, right? I grew up on the 26th story of a 35-story building in Lower Manhattan across from the World Trade Center. And in London, I've lived in really big cities. We never had plants in our house growing up. I don't think either of my parents have ever grown anything in their life. I cannot tell you the hard left turn that I have made in some of these things that I'm interested in. And it's really fun to be a beginner. But I've also noticed I can't be a beginner in every area of my life, right? There's only so much of that activation energy. And so I want to be putting my sort of my mind resources into learning new skills. And that energy has to come from somewhere, and I am choosing for it to come from work.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. I've felt very clearly over the past year or two how I have to think about what I'm attending to each day. Even literally yesterday, I was recording with people and I was feeling really jazzed about it. And I was I could keep going. And then I had to stop myself because I was I need actually to do this whole painting thing I'm doing in the basement. And if I record another thing, I will have no energy to do that. And I think it's taken me quite a while to realize that the work things I'm doing on my computer also require energy. And that doesn't mean I can just get up and then have all this energy to move around the world after. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing how you're thinking about that. And I loved what you said around the task will take the time that we give it. It will fill the time that we give it. I think that that's a really nice reminder that instead of rushing away from your life to get back to work, you can perhaps rush away from work to get back to your life.
Or ideally not be rushing at all. And sometimes we are in seasons where that is just necessary. Plenty of times for plenty of us, the plate is way more full than we want it to be. And it feels untenable, not because there's something wrong with you, but because it is untenable. Because the conditions that we are expected to live under these interlocking systems of oppression, they are untenable. There's nothing wrong with any individual person because they can't figure out how to work 40 plus hours a week and grocery shop and feed themselves and have friends and family and hobbies and act and what? Right? And so if we start from the framing that that was never supposed to work for everyone, what decisions do we make from within that? And part of when I said, and not rushing, that a lot of what I have been trying to work through and still comes up for me all of the time is busyness as worthiness. The amount of self-talk that I have had to do for years, as you know, to let myself take an afternoon nap, and I don't remember which episode of your podcast it was that you said this on, but you said something to the effect of, if I want, if my vision is for everyone to be able to have, a beautiful life, and you can put any word in there, a beautiful life, a wonderful life, a restful life, a whatever, loving life, then it has to be okay for me to have that also. And that it's I would love if anybody who was tired could take a nap. But I'm not allowed to take a nap? What? Why do I think I'm special or different or there's just a lot of this. And so a lot of this is what I'm thinking about as I am now coming out of what was a defined period of time called gap year. That is now over. Okay, now what?
Now what? Back to the newsletter.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Okay, well, I named my newsletter that because that's the question that I'm always asking, right? It's if this is true, then what? Because so much of my life is, my life philosophy is, what's the next right step? And I don't mean right in some kind of morally perfectionist way, but what is the next right step? And I think a lot about the question from Autumn Brown and Adrienne Marie Brown's podcast, How to Survive the End of the World, they ask a question that's essentially, what can you do that you will do? And the way that I have rephrased that to myself is, what can I do that I am willing to do today? From all of this stuff, whether it's degrowth, interrogating enoughness, all of the, like, it all can seem so much, right? What can you do that you are willing to do today or this week or whatever, right? It's just the next right step. It's not, and now I must overhaul my entire business to get into a right size thing of enough. Like, there's a reason I've been doing some version of this for almost 20 years as my job, and I'm only now like, okay, I think I know it enough. Like, this shit takes time, you know? It's like, woof.
Yeah, it really does take time. Well, I want to leave listeners with that question. What can I do that I'm willing to do today? I think that if you, dear listener, are still here with us at this point, like, that is the prompt to sit with and be with as you let this conversation kind of like integrate in your body and your business. And if you loved everything that Nic said here, I want to highly, 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 highly recommend that you subscribe to their newsletter. Become a paying subscriber. It is pay what you can. You can choose your entry point, but I can tell you, you're going to want those essays. So I recommend just signing up from the start. And I'm very excited because Nic and I are going to be doing a monthly series here on the podcast starting, I guess, technically this month, because this is coming out at the beginning of February and it will begin at the end of February. But we will be kind of convening at the end of each month to have a conversation about what's working, what's not working, and what we're noticing in different areas of our work and life. So you can keep an eye out for that here on the feed. It'll be available to everyone. We're committing to doing it through the spring, and then we'll probably take a summer break because I believe in summer breaks. And then we'll see if we return in the fall or how it feels, because we're just taking it one step at a time, as Nic very nicely reminded us. And until then, Nic, is there anything else that you want to share with folks on the show?
I'm very excited to do this series with you. You, obviously, behind the scenes, are one of my favorite people personally, but you're also one of my favorite people to be in conversation with about these ideas. I really appreciate the questions you ask and the way that you challenge and inspire me. I feel like I will say my hope is, if anyone listening, if this resonated, like, this sounds weird, but like, send me an email. I'm as we have discussed, work-wise, I'm not that busy right now. And I really want, especially as I've made some of these shifts, it's cool to be reminded, like, okay, I'm not the only one who feels this way. And so I really am, subscribe to the newsletter if you want, whatever. And if you do, like, come be in the comment. Like, I want to talk to people about these ideas because I feel like we build the future that we want, like, with the actions that we're taking right now. And I really want to be in conversation with more people who want the things that I want, if that makes sense. And so while I'm excited to talk to you and do this series, I'm also hoping to, like, meet more people through it who are trying to do similar things in their own lives, because any of these things done individually, sure, can have benefits in your own life. Like, defining enoughness for yourself, I think, is a useful thing just selfishly to do. But so many of us doing some version of that collectively, there is power there, I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
So basically, yeah, be my friend, but not, right. How do I not get myself back into parasocial energetic burnout, right? But that's the thing. I want to talk to people about these ideas. So yes, I love it.
I think subscribing to the newsletter and arriving in the comments is a great way to do that. You can also send Nic an email and they will reply when they have the time, energy, and desire to do so. So thank you so much, folks, for tuning in. I'm really excited. I will reshare that Online Business Growth Escalator episode soon, so you can listen to it or you can scroll back and find it on the feed. Nic and I will be returning for our series at the end of the month. And until then, we will see you off the grid.
I kinda hate social media, feeds on my brain like a bacteria. If you read my Wikipedia, it'll say I kinda hate social media. Post a picture of myself, sacrifice my mental health, use your product, time to sell. I would rather go to hell. Do you like this? comment? Can you share this? Will you share this? Okay.
That was an abridged version of Social Media by Surfer Boy and Rectangle. To hear the entire song, find Surfer Boy on Spotify or head to the link in the show notes. Thanks so much to them for sharing the song with us, as well as to Melissa Caitlin Carter, who sings our theme song that you hear at the start of every show. I'm your host, Amelia Fruby, and if you enjoyed this episode, I hope you will download the free Leaving Social Media Toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. Until next time, I will see you off the grid.